All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peeler Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have none other than Matt Gary. Anybody who is familiar with powerlifting, especially the game day aspect of things, know that Matt is very well regarded for a very good reason. Matt has competed for, I believe, 27 years in powerlifting. He is also a USAPL senior international coach and frequently coaches at the highest levels at IPF Worlds, Raw Nationals for the USAPL, and he's also a national level referee. And then I think Matt is also just very, very well known for his preparation and attention to detail, and I think that that's something that is really special, because I think that sometimes that's lost with some coaches, especially with the game day aspect of things. But yeah, if you have if your favorite powerlifter, Matt has probably been around them or at least influenced them to some way, shape, or form. So I just wanted to really thank Matt for being willing to come on today.
Well, Adam, thank you so much. That's a very flattering introduction, and I'm just honored to be here and have a candid conversation with you. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I guess without beating around the bush and just getting right into things, I wanted to get into, I guess, first off, what goes into being a good coach. And I guess I want to, besides just the programming and mindset, I guess talking about the spirit of coaching, because I think that sometimes people get into coaching for the wrong reasons, or they don't actually understand what does it actually mean to be a good coach. What are the intangibles that a good coach, the qualities that they possess, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it starts with each coach having a very clear and defined life philosophy. And I think your life philosophy, frankly, is inextricably linked to your coaching philosophy. And so I think that, and that's not a sexy answer. I think when you ask somebody, hey, what's your coaching philosophy? They might immediately regurgitate something about RPE or percentage-based training or high volume, high frequency. And that's not even remotely close to what I'm talking about. I'm really referring to, developing your own personal philosophy, which is basically a combination of your values and beliefs that really, frankly, act as a moral compass to help you guide your decisions and guide your decisions not only in life, but then in coaching. So I think that a really good first step to becoming a good coach is having a clear and defined life philosophy. And that starts by defining what your values are and what's really critical and crucial and important to you. And so, there's many different types of values that each of us hold dear. But I think at the baseline or the bedrock, you've got to determine what are your foundational values in life. What do you literally and figuratively stand upon? And so there can't be that many, because if you prioritize everything, then not everything is a priority, if that makes any sense. So you really have to define your foundational values, and then up from there, maybe that's some of those are religious or spiritual. Some of those are maybe perhaps family related. Health, might be a foundational value, something that you hold very dear. And then from there, you kind of look at what your core values are. And, core values can be anything. I mean, there's so many to choose from, but kind of my 5, if you will, core values are gratitude, integrity, love, respect, and wisdom. And so those kind of serve as the pillars that hold me up. And so, I think it starts with defining what your values are. And then after that, you can kind of develop a mission statement. And then that kind of from there builds into, some of the answers that are probably a little sexier and probably what people want. And so, my mission statement when it comes to coaching personally is just, I want to help people become stronger, or the strongest versions of themselves, both on and off the platform. So clearly, primarily what I do is coach powerlifting, and that's clearly the subset of the population that I deal with. But not only do I want them to become the strongest version of themselves on the platform, where that's reflected via their best total, ultimately, but also just the strongest version of themselves off the platform. And so, strength is measured in many ways, and it's, germane to powerlifting is, of course, it's the squat, bench, and deadlift, but their strength of character, the strength of mind, heart, body, and soul, and so forth. And so when you establish a mission statement, you can reinforce that mission statement by then developing a mantra, a catchphrase, if you will. And for us, at SSPT, it's upholding the standard. And so when we say those 3 words, upholding the standard, in our language and our vernacular, we know exactly what that means. And that reflects us back to our standard values and then what we stand upon and what we believe in and so forth. And so then beyond that, because I know that none of that is really all that sexy, I think it's really important to establish and a connection with each athlete. You've got to share a connection with that person, and you have to meet them where they are personality wise, and you have to, connect with them on their terms. That doesn't mean that I don't establish boundaries within my relationships with athletes and so forth, but you have to kind of meet them where they are. If you have an athlete, I use this as an example a lot, for instance, on game day, that's real extroverted and a real rah-rah type person, then you have to be, a little bit of a cheerleader. Whereas if you've got somebody who's more introverted and introspective and a little bit more thoughtful, then perhaps you just lead by example and you're, a little bit more quiet and a little bit reserved. And I think those connections, ultimately all of coaching is built upon relationship, and it's relationship with coach and athlete, and then athlete back to coach. And so you've got to share some common ground and find some common ground. And again, I think when you're searching for a good coach, or what I would think of as a good coach, again, you've got to look at values, man, because if your values are incongruent, and that doesn't mean that I'm not talking about belief systems. I'm not talking about politics or religion or any of that stuff. What I'm talking about is values, what you hold dear, your modus operandi, your code of conduct, if you will. That's where you can agree. You can be very, very different in your belief systems, because oftentimes those become dogmatic anyway. But it's really, really important to have a shared connection of values, and then be able to communicate with your lifter and your athlete on their terms. And then clearly, if you want to get into some of the, weeds, if you will, in terms of the programming stuff, I mean, I can elaborate on that, but I think those things are really what I believe to be most important in the art of, in the realm of coaching.
I have definitely found that with my clients. The relationship is really where everything, that's like where the best progress kind of comes, because one, if I have a good relationship with my athletes, there's probably also a lot more trust, because that's a huge part about coaching. And so something that I do personally with my athletes is I will hop on phone calls with them. I will do asynchronous video check-ins where I'll ask them to, film a video of them, and like I kind of can see their face, hear like their words. And sometimes, the logs I send them, and I say, oh, everything's going on paper, but then, going well on paper, but then you talk to them where you actually see how they're acting relative to normal, or like what is normal for that person, and you can maybe something's off. I also like how you said that just having like sort of like, I thought like when you were kind of talking about like the whole upholding the standard, like having like a culture, like a standard of excellence that you hold all of your athletes to. And some two kind of things I tell my athletes is like, one, do your job, and then two is be relentless, because I think those two things are super critical, not just, going back to what you said about, this is not just about on the platform, but also outside of the platform. That's what a lot of life success it comes down to. So I guess what I wanted to ask was, going off of that in terms of being stronger off the platform, what are some things that you think that powerlifting not only has taught you, but you've seen as being able to teach your athletes that has impacted their life in a positive way?
Man, I think, well, first of all, you just nailed it with your description. I applaud everything that you just said. We're totally on the same page in terms of developing trust and communicating. And I think these face-to-face interactions with athletes are critical. We live in this day and age where everything, where lots of times people are keep you at arm's distance with a text message or something like that. And it's nice to literally and figuratively interface with somebody and build those relationships where you lay eyes on somebody. And the best case scenario would be interacting with someone in person. But the reality is that there's so much virtual coaching that takes place and remote coaching. So hopefully the coach leverages the technology to their advantage to get in front of a camera and, like you said, get some eyeballs into this person. So I applaud what you said. In terms of what lifting has done for me and what I think it does for your athletes, I mean, there are so many life lessons that can be learned literally and figuratively under the bar. You know what I mean? Just by as you said, doing your job and learning how to put in the work and learning how to work and establishing work ethic, and some people may not be hard workers by nature, but I think powerlifting is one of those sports where you get out of it what you put into it, and so it can help to increase your work ethic by virtue of the fact that you start to see, hey, you reap what you sow. And if I pour more effort into my training and I pour, and that could be both in and out of the gym, like you said, then you're going to reap those rewards and reap those benefits. So I think, work ethic is one of those things. I think the other thing is learning to deal with failure and learning to deal with setback. We have triumphs in this sport. Every time you hit a PB, that's a win. But if you stick around in this game long enough, you're also going to have some setbacks. You're going to have some workouts that suck. You're going to have some injuries more than likely. And that's not a pessimistic view. That's just a realistic one, that if you're pushing your body to the limit of its capacities, its adaptive capacities and recuperative capacities, eventually, something's going to break down or something's going to wear out. And so learning to deal with these setbacks and dealing with failure, if you will, is huge, because if you can open your mind up and realize that these are opportunities, every setback, it's cliche, every setback is an opportunity for a comeback, but it's true. If you can frame it in that way, it's a tremendous way to learn how to deal with difficult things that come in your path. And so that's what I mean about becoming a stronger person, because if you're just, training is hard, and inherently a lot of the workouts are tough. And I mean, it's like, sometimes I tell people, man, if you got to get through that squat workout, and it's a hard workout, it's a lot of volume, you've got some high RPE work that you've got to do, that might be the toughest thing that you tackle all day. And if you can get through that, then the rest of your day seems quite easy. So, you know what I mean? It's like, man, I just went through a really freaking tough workout, and now the rest of my day is on cruise control compared to what I just put my body through. So it teaches you those life lessons as well, in terms of struggle, in terms of work ethic, in terms of setback and dealing with that and overcoming that. And I think also, to your point with coaching and having a relationship with a coach, you're a coach yourself, but then you also have a coach. So that learning to kind of play both parts, and be an effective communicator, lubricates all of the relationships that are in your life. And so if you become an effective communicator as the coach to the athlete, and as the athlete back to the coach, there's more, I just think there's a higher likelihood that your friendships and your family relationships will improve as well. So I don't know, there's probably 3, 4, 5 things right there that I just stated that, kind of are some lessons and benefits, that are reaped from being a lifter and being an athlete and working hard.
I really wanted to go back to what you said about how, there's going to be workouts that are just tough. And I think that right now it's kind of in vogue for powerlifting too. And I think there's some good research too that's more upcoming, and that, some easier training can also be beneficial. But, I've always kind of had this, I've had like some of my, maybe I'm training like too hard. It's just like, nope, like just getting stronger and really trying to get to be, to the best that you possibly can be. It's going to take work. You're going to have some sessions where like that top double at Ep.29 is just going to feel like it took everything that you've ever had. You're going to have to go places. You're going to have to do things that scare you. And for me personally, it's built, like, in addition to all those things, I just developed just a bigger sense of confidence. Like, I feel like when you're strong, or you've been able to do a lot of these things, or you've proven that you've been able to improve yourself and do something that's just frankly challenging, but most of the population just can't do or isn't doing. I think that kind of puts you in, it makes you feel a certain way about yourself. And I've seen that with a lot of my friends. Like, that's something else too, I feel like powerlifting has also given me, is with the whole deeper relationship thing. Getting pretty personal here. I mean, I started out powerlifting or weight training in general 5 years ago when I was anorexic at 135 pounds, and I had just destroyed all my relationships. I couldn't, do really anything. I was basically just going throughout the day, just existing. And I had alienated all my family, all my friends. ever since I kind of started powerlifting and I got stronger, man, like every single aspect of my relationships improved. I was able to actually go out and eat with my family, eat with my friends, and just kind of being able to focus on something else too, besides just like, obviously how you look is important too. But I think proving to yourself like that your body is capable of so many different things. Like there's obviously research on the fact that exercise improves, your, happiness, it's better for fighting anxiety and depression. And so while it is cliche to say like, oh, this is my therapy, and like for a lot of people, I do think it really can be, especially depending upon where you're coming from. And I personally have found that with a lot of my clients, like being, especially as I work longer and longer with them, like one, you also develop like what we said about how coaches and how athletes like just need sometimes different communication styles. Like I have some lifters and like I train in person, or I'll even just spot in the gym. Like one kid named Caleb who's like very strong. He competed at college nats and or teen nats, one of the two. But like if I yell at him, like if he like wants, like that does not work for him. Like it has to be very chill. Like you got this, man. Like let's go. And then he just turns it on. Whereas for like, and then like also for me, like on my meet when I like on my third deadlift, it's just like don't talk to me. Like do not talk to me. Like I need to go in my own head. Whereas some athletes just like you have to yell at them, and they really thrive off of that. So
Sure.
there's so many different like things and that you can learn from just powerlifting in general. And I do really encourage powerlifting just because I feel like it's just hard. Like it's really hard. Bodybuilding is hard too, but I just I feel like training can give you so much back to your life, but also does teach you, like you said. I feel like it's one of those things where you really do get back kind of what you put in, and obviously there's a genetic component there with how far that you can go. But I mean, if you work hard, you're going to get stronger. I think that's really beautiful. And for some people, like you were going to have to grind for progress and just itch and crawl. But that's what makes those PRs even sweeter.
Yeah, and the coolest thing, right? One of the coolest things that you can get out of this is the PB, the PR, right? It's literally doing something that you've never done before. And so, like you said, and getting stronger is cool. I mean, it's freaking cool. Like strength is an asset. I can't even think of any time where strength is a liability. And like you said, when you walk into a room and you are a physically strong person, or if even if you don't give off that you're not muscle bound or whatever, you don't necessarily look like a Russell Warhe or something, but if you're strong and you're capable of grinding through these workouts and lifting heavy weights, even if that's an imperceptible trait from other people, you just have an air about you, and it's not a cockiness, but it's a confidence, and you walk with your head a little bit higher, and you feel a little bit better about yourself. And as you said, perfect example was, it just bleeds into and pours into the other relationships in your life, and it just adds value to those relationships as well. So yeah, I think it's cool all the way around.
Yeah. So basically, powerlift. If you should listen to this podcast, if you haven't, although the likelihood of you not doing that is, this is our sales pitch for powerlifting. We're trying to recruit more people.
Exactly.
So I guess I wanted to just discuss this very brief programming topic in terms of your deadlift programming strategy, because people that are familiar with SSPT, I believe so. You and Susie, I believe, came up with Susie. If you guys don't know, Susie's like literally like one of the best to ever do it. Phenomenal power lifter. I think she's won like 30 titles or something like that.
Yeah, she just won her 31st national championship.
Yeah, insane.
Yeah,
insane.
31.
Still going strong. Titles. Yeah. Yep. We all want to be like Susie. But so Matt and Susie have a very unique programming strategy for deadlift, and it really revolves around singles. So I wanted to discuss sort of like why you came up with that sort of approach, and what utility it might have over some training approaches.
Yeah, so I first kind of discovered all of this reading some Russian training journals, specifically printed by Verkhoshansky. And of course, it was alluded to some in the book called Super Training, which I know a lot of people like to quote, by Dr. Mel Siff and Yuri Verkhoshansky. I think they collaborated on that text. But essentially what it revolves around the fact that the deadlift is unique in competition because it's the only lift that you literally just lift. right? You're not, you know, you don't lower the weight before you lift it. So there is no stretch reflex involved. And so I always posit the question to people. Imagine if in the squat, we set the pins low below parallel, and you had to walk out and you had to squat underneath the bar and kind of hunker down and then just lift the bar off the pins, right? Without lowering it first. So if that makes sense, if you just got underneath the bar and had to lift it only, but not lower it first, and that was your lift, wouldn't you train the squat differently? Or if you were just pressing from the chest instead of lowering the bar first. So if the bar started on your chest or started on some pins right at chest level, and all you had to do was press it to lockout, wouldn't you, in theory, because there is no stretch reflex, train it differently? Well, that's actually what you're doing with the deadlift. When you walk out for a competition deadlift and you just pick it up. So clearly there are abundant examples of people doing multiple reps in the deadlift and being supremely strong. So I'm not going to sit here and pontificate about my way being the only way. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that doing singles only in the competition style deadlift, where you're not taking advantage of the stretch reflex, makes more sense in a scientific training aspect, if you will, and the application of training. If we just look at training from a scientific perspective and we look at, you know, the way that you're actually doing the lift, to me, it just makes more sense to do a copious amount of singles as opposed to, you know, a set of 10. So like, let's just say we'll use a set of 10 as an example. If you do a set of 10 in the deadlift, in all likelihood, the two hardest reps of that set are going to be the first one, because you have to overcome inertia and break it from the floor. And then probably your 10th one because you're fatigued, right? All the middle sets, you know, or the middle singles, if you will, the middle repetitions, presumably, at least from probably like 2 to 6, are probably going to be a lot easier, because you're then going to be able to lower the bar first, take advantage of the stretch reflex on the next repetition. So if you do a set of 10 and I do 10 singles, and let's say we both use 200 kilos, we've essentially done the same amount of work, but I've given myself 10 opportunities where you've only, for our first repetitions, which is what you do in competition, whereas you've only given yourself 1 opportunity. So even if you do 2 sets of 5 and I do 10 singles, we've done, again, the same amount of work, but I've given myself more opportunities to perfect my setup, to perfect my approach, to develop explosive starting and accelerating strength off the floor. Whereas if you know that you've got to do a set of 5, or like I said, a set of 10, even a double or a triple, you inherently are going to pace yourself, knowing that you have to knock out 2 or 3 of these. Whereas I'm walking up to the bar, my athletes walking up to the bar, and they're ripping the hell out of the bar with maximum force because they don't have to pace themselves. They're only doing 1 repetition, and then they set the bar down, and then they walk away, take a short rest break, and come back. Because what the science and the literature tells us is that the stretch reflex all but dissipates in about 4 seconds. So even if you lower the bar down on the floor and you physically let go of it and you step away, but you walk back up and you pull a rep in fewer than 4 seconds, you still have stored elastic energy built up in your muscles and in your tendons that you are then using for the next repetition. So therefore, it stands to reason that the rest periods need to be longer than 4 seconds. And typically they are. So depending upon the intensity, depending upon how much volume we're doing, we typically rest, 30 to 60 seconds between a deadlift. So it's enough to kind of walk away, maybe grab a sip of water, re-chalk your hands if you need to, clear your head, whatever, come right back up, set back up. Now, when we're talking about when you're getting close to a meet and you're lifting loads of 90% plus, then clearly we're taking longer rest periods. Maybe sometimes those rest periods look like something you might experience at a meet. So if you're doing, let's say, 4 or 5 singles with like 90%, something around an opener, yeah, we're going to give you some more rest. And you can rest 3, 4, 5 minutes, maybe even 8, 9, 10 minutes if you want, kind of treat it like a meet setting. So that literally and figuratively, you are executing pretty much the same way that you're going to execute on game day, because you're not, you're not required to lower the bar. So that's it in a nutshell. And it's worked great for the lifters that I've coached. It reduces the risk of injury also, I find, because you're not constantly struggling to get that 3rd, 4th rep of the set. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying that multiple rep sets don't have some utility. There can be an argument made for time under tension and accumulating fatigue that way and so forth. I just find that in developing max effort, 1 RM strength, which is defined by powerlifting, basically, that's what we're after. How much can we lift for 1 rep? The singles seem to be the most effective way. And so I know that was a mouthful, but you can actually go on my Instagram. And if you go back a couple of years, I actually have the chart that I think I took right out of Super Training or Verkhoshansky's manual. And it talks about the stretch reflex and where it begins to dissipate. So yeah, I mean, maybe we can put that in the show notes or something.
Yeah, for sure. I'm
yeah,
going to add that. And I wanted to ask, because I think there's a single day, like what approach is a 2-day and a 3-day. Mm-hmm. So how would you go about like determining like what sort of frequency on deadlift?
Yeah, so oftentimes what I'll do is I'll start somebody with a singles day, that's their competition style deadlift. And then based upon where their weaknesses are or their weaknesses revolve, if they're weak off the floor, let's say, if their starting strength is poor, then I might program something like a deficit deadlift on a second day as an adjunct to that. Gotcha. If they're weak in the middle ranges of motion, maybe I'll have them do a halting or a pause deadlift at or around the knee, maybe some block pulls, some rack pulls, RDLs, things of that nature, whatever, kind of that, specific weakness. And we address that on the second day. As we get closer to the competition, and typically I'll have them do those special exercises, if you will, in mesocycles of maybe 3 to 4 weeks at a time. And the reason that I kind of pick that, and sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 4. And hey, if they're really seeing success from that exercise, we might stretch it out to 4, 5, 6 weeks. If they're still making progress, there's no set rule that says, you got to stop that exercise at 4 weeks. I mean, things fit into a calendar neatly and nicely at the 4-week period, but we don't have to stop the exercise if you're still seeing gains from that. But having said that, I like a lifter to use a special exercise or an assistance movement like that for a few weeks so that they can use the first week to just kind of acclimate to the movement. And then the second and third week kind of accrue and accumulate some volume. And then maybe by the 4th week or the 5th week or what have you, then maybe they're striving for either a rep PR or a weight PR or a little bit of both. And then you can rotate those exercises through. And again, those are always specific to the lifter. So if you have a lifter who's not weak off the floor, then, then don't spend time doing a ton of deficits because they don't necessarily need to do that just because their favorite lifter on Instagram does them or something. So, and then sometimes as we get closer to a meet, we might ditch that and I might just have them deadlift again with singles competition style on a second day, but at a lower intensity than their main day.
Gotcha. Yes.
Yeah, either a lower percentage or a lower RPE. And since we're only doing singles and it's hard to gauge an RPE on a single, for my lifters who are using bar speed, sometimes we'll set bar speed caps and things of that nature as well.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense because when I was looking at it, I was assuming that was what the intentionality behind having different days. If the lifter needs a little bit more practice with the lift, a little bit more exposure to different intensity zones, and like obviously like using variations, like I think that's a really good point that they made with using those variations to really help correct technique in a way that forces the lifter to kind of exposes them to the positions that they're weaker in, or they might have a difficult time maintaining. And I just going off of what you said about singles and whatnot and transferability to meet the expectations. Like I've absolutely noticed that myself. There's some guys or girls that are just phenomenal at doing reps, and there are other guys and girls like myself that I'm like I am better at singles. Just I've always been better at singles, and something I will use is when you talk about the acceleration, the intentionality. I found that for usually when I'm looking at transferability over to how much does this rep PR potentially translate to like a 1 rep max on a single, is actually how fast do they accelerate on that first rep, and maybe how fast their rate of like deceleration, or how fast do they fatigue as the reps do go on. Because I found that generally that means they probably are producing a ton of force in that first rep, and that's really the skill of powerlifting. Because when you're at the, anybody who's familiar with, I believe it's the Henneman's size principle, those type 2 motor units, they have to be, the reason why some people are really good at singles and being really, really strong is they can turn all those motor units super, super fast. Whereas just for people who are unfamiliar, say you're doing a set of 10. Well, your body's going to only recruit those low threshold type 1 motor units until maybe around those last 3 reps when those type 2 muscle fibers will actually come into play to help complete the work. Whereas if you're doing a set of, with 90%, you have no other option. Like those things have to be turned on from the word go.
That's
So
right. Yep.
just a really, really ingenious way to program. And deadlift is one of those lists where I do tend to usually keep in singles more frequently year round, even if it may not be in that approach.
Yep.
It kills me when you are talking about like the stretch reflex and whatnot, and people, especially, they do reps and they don't dead stop it. They're just like,
I mean, if I don't want to sound like a hater, but if you're bouncing your reps, I mean, it's a waste of time. I mean, it's one thing if you compete in strongman where you have to do like a max effort, as many reps as you can accumulate. But I'm talking about, this conversation is specific to powerlifting. So, if you're going to do multiple reps, then I would strongly encourage you to do, they've got to be absolute dead stops, not touch and goes, not bounced. They've got to be dead stops. And if you want to take advantage of that stretch reflex dissipating, then you've got to give yourself about 4 seconds between reps. So.
I also like how you were talking about, if maybe you're more of a volume accumulation, but if you're doing a little bit lower percentages, like still move that as fast as you possibly can. Like that's just the mindset of a single, like do your job, like you're practicing your sport and treat it like that sport practice.
Yep. And it gives us, as you get closer to the meet, the beauty of doing so many singles is it also gives you a better indicator of what's going to be available on meet day. You know what I mean? And so, and oftentimes as we approach a meet, we'll schedule our heaviest deadlifts after, intentionally schedule them after squats, after a significant squat, so that we're already approaching that in a fatigue state. And then, as I said, it makes the temp selection that much easier, and we know what your capabilities are based upon bar speed, and it gives you a lot of confidence because, like you said, you're holding true to your sport form.
How heavy would you usually program in your heaviest single going into a meet on the squat, bench, or deadlift in terms of like a percentage or RPE?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say so. For squat and deadlift, typically, again, I'm just painting with broad strokes, but it's going to vary. There's some individualization here, but I would say typically we're going up to second attempt-ish in the neighborhood. So maybe you're talking 95, 96% for squats and deadlifts. And then you kind of cap it there and then build more volume beneath that. And then for the bench, I mean, I think you can push the bench up honestly to a max or a third attempt or a circa max or what have you in the bench press. Obviously with most people, the bench recovers so much more quickly. It's less impact on the body as an organism, if you will. And so, you can push the bench closer to the competition and at a greater intensity. Maybe you are taking that up to a third attempt or right below a third attempt, or in some cases you're actually taking your third attempt in the gym, just making sure that it's the competition standard and so forth. And hopefully you're on body weight or at body weight or very close to body weight. And again, with the bench, make sure that, or I would advise, or I would, recommend that you do it after a significant squat. It's one thing to hit a bench PB all by itself as a standalone exercise. It's another thing to do it after squatting. So,
yeah, in my programming for my limited lifters, I may not always program in an SPD day, right, but I do typically like having a squat or deadlift or squat bench day at least like once per week, so that we can have those appropriate expectations, because everything after the squat happens after the squat. So understanding how that impacts your shoulder girdle, impacts how fatigued that you are on deadlift, and what your expectations that you can have is just super important, because it's always sad when you see people with these expectations, pulling fresh or benching fresh, and it's just like, man, like maybe that's not going to be there for you on game day. So definitely programming split considerations are huge.
Yeah, it's funny because when someone will come to me and say, hey, I had a PB in whatever exercise, and typically it's obviously the bench or the deadlift, I have two questions that I ask them. Number one, were you on body weight? And number two, did you squat first? And so, because those are two huge variables, right? So if you, particularly with the bench, I mean, being on body weight is critical, or being really close, right? Because the bench is the exercise that's, most adversely affected by changes in body weight. So yeah, those are kind of my two knee-jerk questions and responses, because otherwise you're dealing with apples and oranges.
Okay, so I guess going off of that, I wanted to ask you, because you have had experience handling lifters at the highest level, and also, coaching some. So I wanted to ask you, what are some traits that you've noticed that most high level competitors possess in their training and in competition?
In their training and their competition.
Or it could be
So,
like separated if it has to be.
yeah, so let's talk about some obvious ones really quickly in terms of elite level lifters. I mean, the two probably most obvious ones that are just low hanging fruit is genetics and work ethic, right? And I don't want to necessarily play the genetics card in terms of saying, that nobody else has a chance, but I could train my entire life and take all the drugs that I want, and I'm never going to beat Usain Bolt in a race. It's just not going to happen. That guy's got some genetic traits that I don't possess. And so you have to realize that you are going to be limited by your genetic potential. That's why when people say that, effort and hard work, trumps genetics any day, I don't necessarily buy into that, because like I said, I could work a lifetime and not be able to beat him in a foot race. But putting a pin in that and kind of setting that aside, because those are two obvious ones, elite level, high level powerlifters that are lifting the most weights and are, in each discipline, obviously are going to possess some genetic characteristics that are favorable in order to lift those weights. And obviously they're going to have a very high work capacity and work ethic. I don't think anybody gets to the top by faking it or doing a little. Most of the people are there because of what they do, not in spite of what they do. So those are kind of two obvious ones. I think in terms of the competitive arena, I think one of the biggest things is they all possess the ability to compartmentalize. And what I mean by that is being able to put things in their proper place at the appropriate time. Lifters can become overwhelmed and encumbered by, training and nutrition and influences on social media and so on and so forth. And it's being able to put things in their proper place, and it's being able to therefore have a higher level of focus than a novice or an intermediate level lifter, or let's say a really strong lifter who just doesn't excel like they excel at the most elite levels, because they're not able to focus and be intentional, which kind of leads itself into mindfulness, and what I mean by about mindfulness is just staying in the moment, staying where you are. It's having a bookmark, if you will, at where you are within your process, and understanding that this is where I am at this particular time, and my chapter 4 doesn't necessarily equal your chapter 4 or even your chapter 10 and so on. Is that we can be at different stages of our training process, different stages of development, and not being influenced by what everybody else is doing at that particular time. So being mindful of the moment, I think that really high level lifters possess that. And then another thing, just from the mental aspect, is really elite level lifters have this ability to frame things appropriately. And what I mean by that is create opportunities for themselves to create multiple wins. Bryce Lewis at TSA talks about this all the time. He talks about framing things appropriately, and rather than putting all of your eggs in one basket where this competition is a complete and total failure if I lose. If I come in second place, it's a disaster. No, it's not. You can create multiple opportunities to win, and there's other boxes that you can check aside from just getting the gold medal. You know what I mean? Did I have fun? Did I compete well? Did I hit a squat PB? Did I break this record? Have I improved qualitatively over my last meet? You know what I mean? Was my weigh-in process better? All of these different things. There's a multitude of things that you can do to help create and frame wins and losses. And high-level athletes have an ability to do that. I was coaching Mike Tuchscherer at the World Cup. That was the very first Raw Worlds, if you will, in 2012. It was just called the World Cup. It was in Sweden in 2012. And he was on the end of some controversial squat calls. He'd missed his first 2 squats, okay, and was in danger of bombing out of the meet. But he made his 3rd squat, and when he came off the platform, he looked at me, and this is just a winner's attitude. He goes, well, I didn't have to go all out on squats, so now I've got some extra energy for deadlifts. And that was such a great way of framing it in the moment of dealing with a bad situation where it's like, yeah, it sucks. I didn't get to do my 2nd, my 3rd attempt, I had to stay in the meet with my opener essentially, but I've got this bonus capacity. And now my back isn't fried. I didn't really have to work too hard in the squats, and I've got room in the deadlift. And the same is true of Ray Williams in 2018, where that was probably the strongest that Ray has ever been headed into a meet. A lot of people don't know this, and I don't celebrate this on social media, but I am Ray's coach and I do his programming and so forth. But Ray was about at his pinnacle of strength at that particular time, heading into 2018 Worlds. And once again, he didn't satisfy the standard in terms of squat depth. Yet, through that day, he was able to then make 6 of 6 attempts and knock it out of the park, and hit a world record in the deadlift, become a world champion, and also get the best lifter. And so it's being able to take those moments where you have a momentary setback and frame it in your mind where we still have an opportunity for a win. Now you ask me also, what do these lifters possess, commonalities, if you will, in training? And I really think, again, this isn't a sexy answer, but I think it's one that I've kind of lived by. I believe that an athlete's greatest ability, their single greatest ability, is availability. And what I mean by that is health. And that is the ability to train. Okay. All of us, whether you're novice, intermediate, advanced, elite, whatever, you're going to make your best gains, presumably, when you're healthy, when you right, when everything's feeling good, and when you're healthy and you don't have any setbacks. And so your greatest ability is availability, because that's when you can reap the rewards and get this abundance paid back to you from training. And I think your second greatest ability is durability. And what I mean by that is the ability to remain healthy, or the ability to remain available. And so elite level lifters possess those things for the most part. Yeah, they all have setbacks and they all have challenges and they deal with injuries. But if you look at the career arc of the best lifters, they're healthier more than they're injured, right? And I mean, that's just what the data says, the data say, rather. You look at their ability to stay healthy, and then they can sustain progress and keep inching forward over time. And so I think those are some of the greatest characteristics, if you will, that are shared both on the platform and then in the gym.
I love what you said about framing, and especially with the whole competition mindset, because I remember I had that, I think this is not uncommon for lifters, who are especially newer, and, every meet is just so important, especially, it's just like, it's just that perspective. I had my last meet, I hit 501 in training, and that was a huge milestone for me on squat. And everything, I was like, I think I might have like 507 and like 513. And Eric was like, yeah, I think that too. And came in on the day. First attempt moved well. Second attempt was a lot more grindy than I thought it would be. So then I was like, crap. Well, I think 501 is too like 50-50. I'm just going to go with what I know I have on the day. And I called 496, and my ego was screaming at me at that attempt table to be like, dude, just 501, like, cool number. But I was like framing, I'm like, well, it's about making lifts, and it's fine. You'll have a little bit more energy again for deadlift and bench press. And ever since, I've also learned this from the hard way, is I'm pretty good at gauging RPE on singles and like what I have left. If I go against my gut feeling, never works out well for me in the end. I
have a question, if I can ask you.
Yeah.
Was the 496, was that a PB?
And in the competition, yes.
So this is a good thing to mention. So 496, right, is 225 kilos for those that understand the metric system. In America, it's imperial units, and 500 is the big number, 501. Foreign lifters don't give a damn about 227.5 kilos, but American lifters do, right? Yeah. So 500 is a big milestone number. But think of it this way. You hit a PB in the squat, you squatted 496 pounds. So now at the next meet or the meet after, I don't know, maybe have you squatted 501 yet in competition?
No, but I'm probably well above that right now.
Good. So you're well above that. So this lends credence to that point, because you've now done 496. Now the milestone is the next incremental PB. You see what I mean? So it's like sometimes people, they'll squat like 485 at a meet, And then they'll be like, oh, I'm going for 500 at the next meet. And to your point, sometimes they'll just load it on the bar if it's there or not, because they're like, oh, 500, that's the next big milestone. But when matter of factly, you're at 496, 501 is the next incremental PR. So if you go into your next meet and you hit your second attempt at, let's say, whatever it is going to be, let's say it's 479 or 485 or whatever, and you're like, man, I don't think I've got 507 or 5, then you can take 501 because it's the incremental PB. And now you've done two things at once. You've taken the low-hanging fruit of the incremental PB, but then you've got all this kind of lifetime, or not lifetime, but a huge milestone number as well. So I think what you did was great. I mean, you took what was there.
Yeah.
Versus what you wanted.
Yes. And like, I felt this, like the sting of missing a lift, especially when we knew it was the wrong call. It hurts a lot more than, it was like, how I know that, like, you have, like, upholding the standard, you believe the standard should be 7 for 9. And I'm proud to say that's been my track record is 7 for 9. And this last meet, I went 9 for 9, which I was really proud about. I PR'd my total, like, unsurprisingly, because I made all my lifts. And, I'd also think that, maybe if I went for 501, maybe I wouldn't have been able to peak as well on deadlift for later on in that day. So making smart choices is just a really an important thing. And then in regards to, like, durability, like, that's what I have some friends that, they get started with the training, they like the power lifts, but they're, for some reason, their body they just can't handle it. They just don't have the joints, tendons, ligaments to support it. And I've had my fair share of setbacks. I've dealt with a lot strain on and off that flares up every now and again. And I think there are definitely programming strategies to get around that. But besides that, like, that's been, like, the really only, it hasn't even been catastrophic. It's just been like a minor aggravation. Like, I can't train as hard as I want to. And so I guess what you said there, and health is permissive for performance. If you can train, be healthy, and, like, this actually goes super well into the next point. I think there's a lot of pressure right now to make as fast of progress as possible, especially when you look at how fast some of these up and coming, especially like the junior lifters, are progressing. And I have been caught up in that mindset before. I need to make as fast of progress right now, and without thinking more long term in terms of setting myself up for a healthy career, and a career of adding 50 pounds to my total like per year, or something like that, and staying healthy. So, like, how would you like what are your thoughts on the whole, like, pressure to perform? Do you think increases risk of injury and potentially burnouts? And how can new lifters sort of navigate the changing landscape of powerlifting with, like, the social media age?
Yeah, so that's a really good question that I could talk about for an extended period of time, but I want to be mindful of our time. I think so. There's a couple of things. I think it's really important to understand at the very beginning, when you enter into a relationship, a coach and athlete relationship, is you understand, not everybody can put an end cap on something and say, oh, I want to do powerlifting for 5 years and then I'm done. You know what I mean? Or I want to powerlift for a lifetime. Some people can't answer that question, and some of the brightest stars in our sport burn out the fastest, and they're gone, and they're a flash in the pan, and then you don't hear from them. So, but the reason that I mention, I'll often ask somebody, hey, how long do you envision yourself doing this? Or how long do you want to do it? Because let's just say hypothetically that they're like, you know what, I want to do this for the next 3 years, because then I want to get into pursue my career, or I want to start a family or something like that. Then you might be able to make a case for, okay, we've got to turn up the heat a little bit here and try to squeeze as much juice out of this lemon, so to speak, as we possibly can, right? Versus, like you said, there's just this overwhelming pressure because we see people on social media, social media, there's so many layers to that conversation. It's a blessing and it's a curse, and comparison is the thief of joy, and all of those different cliches. But and you see people's excelling at such a great rate, which you feel like, well, I should be doing that too. And if I'm not, I'm either doing something wrong, or I'm not working hard enough, or I need their training program or something of that nature. And so there is that quote unquote pressure. But remember, pressure is something that you can control. Pressure is something that's probably in your head. Nobody is making millions of dollars from this. Nobody is losing their job because they didn't lift a certain amount of weight. We're not like professional athletes where if you have a losing record at the end of the year, the coach or the quarterback is getting fired on the team or something like that, right? So you have to put things in their proper perspective. Most of the pressure that people feel is self-inflicted pressure. And you can control that pressure by your exposure to social media and the outside world. So it's incumbent upon you, I think, to kind of turn that faucet off, if you will, or turn the volume down at appropriate times, so that you're not constantly seeing what everybody else is doing. But having said all of those things, like you said, I really do try to impress upon people. And once again, it's an overused cliche, but it's true, is really learning to enjoy the process and the journey rather than the destination. Because powerlifting is ultimately a sport where there really is no destination when you think about it, because we can always add 1 more kilo to the bar, or you can always do 1 more rep, right? So it's really an infinite, it's an infinite trail, if you will, and a lot of people feel like, well, I'm never strong enough because I can add more weight to the bar and so forth. So what I'll often tell people, like you said, in 50 pounds a year, I mean, if you compete 2 or 3 times a year, and let's just say that you added an incremental PB, which is 2.5 kilos, which is 5 pounds. If you do that 3 times a year, you've added 7.5 kilos to your total at each meet. 7.5 times 3. Yeah, you've just added 23 kilos or 22.5 kilos to your total. That's 50 pounds in a year. And that's really good progress and sustainable over time. Do you know what I mean? Versus YOLOing. And I'm not saying don't take advantage of a big PB when it comes your way. Maybe you had a training breakthrough and it yielded a 10 kilo PB in deadlift, or maybe you went up a weight class and your bench exceeded by 7.5. I'm not saying not to take advantage of those larger personal bests. I'm just saying that when you look at things and you're looking at more long-term development and a long-term approach, if you just kind of mentally set yourself up for, hey, if I could just get an incremental PB, but I'll take more if it's there, then really you're setting yourself up for sustained progress over time versus, okay, I want to accumulate all this progress that I can at once. Now, again, going back to the example that I had, if you do have somebody that for a matter of fact, they're only going to do this for a really short period of time, then you can state a case for, okay, we need to, maybe we increase specificity, we increase, frequency and volume, and we turn up the heat quite a bit so that we can extract these gains, as fast as we possibly can. But I think for most of us, we do this because it adds value to our life. We don't necessarily see the dead end yet. If you know what I mean, this is something that we envision. Most of us envision ourselves doing it for a long time. Therefore, you want to play the long game instead of the short game, but let me just use a really good example of somebody. Chance Mitchell is a really good example. If you saw, I had the pleasure of coaching and working with Chance at PA Nationals in Texas, and then he made the team to go to Worlds, but there was a really quick turnaround. You know what I mean? So for a guy like that who already trains really, really hard and really high volume, he can state a case or make a case for himself where, man, I've got a quick turnaround before Worlds. I need to turn the heat up even more if I want to get, you know what I mean? But again, that's a short-term goal because the World Championships were coming soon, and so, it's kind of like one of those things where, okay, this is a card that we're going to play, but that's not sustainable long-term. You know what I mean? That could potentially open yourself up to injury if you play that card too often. So again, that's just an example of somebody who played the hand perfectly, obviously, you know what I mean? Because he got a big bang for his buck and he got a lot stronger in a really short period of time and so forth. But for most people, I think you've got to play the long game and be a little bit more mindful of what's to come.
I love how you said that we are in control of with the pressure that we do place on ourselves with this stuff, because this is ultimately something that we ultimately all should do to enhance our quality of life. We aren't getting paid, enough money to justify this being, our entire life. This isn't, unfortunately, the sport isn't bodybuilding, where it isn't, we don't have the same funding. And then just framing like your expectations for progress around like, what are your goals right now? How long do you want to do this for? And what opportunities do you have in the near future? I've definitely found that that's been something that I personally have found that for myself, just from my own context, and Derek and I have discussed this, which is why I thought you said it was really get on the same page with coach and athlete about like how, like, what are we trying to achieve here? I told Eric, like, look, in contest prep, like, I'm okay with heating things up a little bit, if I can handle it. But in the off season, I'm all about just a slow, steady grind. As long as I'm healthy in the off season, I can keep chipping away. And I think there's also some argument too for having those periods of sort of lower training stress, potentiating periods of higher training stress. Because if you're constantly going like redlining all year round, you're probably going to have a cylinder break off.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
so
that's a good way of looking at it.
I want to thank you so much for coming on. This is an absolute pleasure, and I hope listeners took a lot from this. Just as to if people want to find you anywhere, where are the best places?
Yeah, probably the two best places to find me would be our website, which is just supremesportspt.com. So that has kind of everything that, Susie and I are about in terms of SSPT, our physical facility out here in Bozeman, Montana, the coaching that we do and so forth. And then, of course, in terms of social media, just at Instagram, it's ML Gary, that's MLGARY72 is the best place to find me there.
Awesome. I'll have that link down in the show notes, as well as the Deadlift program for those of you who are interested. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.